The late afternoon sun hung low over the wide plains, glowing like a tired ember behind miles of dusty grass. A slow wind moved across the land, carrying the smell of dry soil, pine leaves, and distant wood smoke from small homesteads scattered near the valley. Folks in that region lived quiet lives, raising cattle, cutting timber, growing corn and wheat, or minding small family cabins. Strangers hardly passed through unless they were traders or riders heading west for luck. It was a place where every man was judged by the miles of land he owned, the strength of his back, or the boldness of his words. Yet among those people lived one farmer who barely spoke, kept to himself, and walked with a tired look in his eyes, as if he carried a mountain on his shoulders. He was known only as the Quiet Farmer. Some said he had lived there long before most newcomers. Others believed he was just a drifter who built a cabin and decided not to leave. He spoke few words, never caused trouble, never raised his hand on anyone, and showed kindness even when no one cared to return it. He lived near the tree line where the land met the hills, where his little field struggled to grow crops, and a single old mule worked alongside him. Every dawn he stepped out, breathed deep, stared at the horizon, put his hands into the soil like he trusted it more than people. The town was changing fast. New cattle buyers were coming. Gold rumors circled around like crows. A few young men wanted to show they were tougher and smarter than the ones who had lived there quietly for years. Pride was a poison that tasted sweet to some and bitter to others. Whenever those young men gathered near the saloon, they mocked ones who looked weak or gentle. The Quiet Farmer became their favorite to talk about. They laughed that he was slow, that his clothes were rough, his cabin too small, his mule too old, and that he was a waste of land. They did not know his story, and they did not care. For a long time he ignored them. People whispered that he was part Apache or had lived among Apache families in the mountains. Some believed he learned their language and their ways but left for reasons unknown. There were days he stared at the hills like he was calling to someone without words. He crafted handmade tools, shaped wooden bowls with a hand knife, sometimes left food outside his fence, as if offering it to spirits of old land. Children found him strange, but harmless. Women felt pity when they saw him alone near the well. Men felt uneasy because they could not read him. The trouble began on a warm day, when the town prepared for a small fair. Families set up tables with fresh bread, dried fruit, and handmade goods. Riders raced horses along the road. Folks gathered to show off new coats, boots, belts, and rifles. The Quiet Farmer came with only a small basket of beans and corn, harvested with patience. His work did not shine like polished metal or store-bought goods, yet it carried honest sweat. Instead of respect, he was met with whispers. The young men saw him as someone they could turn into a joke. One of them walked up and kicked his basket, spilling the beans onto the dusty ground. The crowd turned silent for a moment, but soon forced laughter filled the air. Another pushed his shoulder and asked why he even came if he had nothing worthy to sell. The farmer did not fight back. He just knelt, slowly gathering the scattered grains with careful hands. The laughter grew louder. A few women looked away with shame. A child nearby asked his mother why they were hurting the man who did nothing wrong. No one answered. The farmer lifted his basket and walked away with quiet steps. He did not shout or look back. His face stayed calm, but his eyes looked darker, as if a storm formed behind them. The young men felt proud of what they did, as if proving they were stronger made them leaders. By evening, rumors spread across the town that the Quiet Farmer may not forget what happened. Some older folks advised the troublemakers not to mock a man who lives close to the hills, because old stories say those hills were watched by Apache eyes, ready to defend those who respected the land. The advice was ignored. During the following days, families lived normal lives, believing the event at the fair was over. The farmer did not return to town. His cabin showed no smoke from far away. His mule stood silent. Some believed he was too ashamed to return. Others claimed he was waiting for something. The young men laughed again, telling people they proved he was nothing. But a few elders felt uneasy because they remembered old bonds formed years before, when settlers and Apache families traded food and tools. They knew the Quiet Farmer spent seasons in the wild, not for fun, but for survival. Rumors blended into questions. Who taught him to survive alone? Who trusted him in the mountains? Why did he often leave cooked food outside his fence instead of eating it all? 7 days passed. The wind turned cooler. Coyotes howled more at night. Some farmers reported seeing shapes moving near the hills like they were shadows following the moonlight. At first no one took it seriously, but then tracks were found near the river, not belonging to cattle or lone riders. The town sheriff tried to calm people by saying travelers probably passed by, but the elders exchanged worried looks. Tracks were too quiet, too clean, too light, and too many. On the 8th night, when every cabin grew darker and people finished their suppers, a strange silence rolled across the land. Dogs stopped barking. Horses did not move. Even the wind paused like the earth was holding its breath. The young men who mocked the quiet farmer suddenly felt a chill in their bones without knowing why. They shut their doors early, though none of them wanted to admit fear. Far away near the tree line, a glow of fire appeared. Not a big flame, only a small guiding light like a signal. Then another light flickered on a far ridge. Soon more appeared like stars on the ground. No voice echoed, no drumbeat rose, but anyone watching would know these were no accidents. Those were watchfires. Lit by trained hands, placed with purpose, forming a silent circle that faced the valley where every home stood, before midnight. Riders dressed in quiet earth-toned clothing appeared like shadows behind rocks, tree trunks, and ridges. They were Apache scouts, trained to see in darkness, moving with steps that left no sign. They watched each home from a safe distance, with calm eyes, not speaking, not attacking, not showing rage, only watching, as if deciding the fate of those who thought the land belonged only to them? No. One knew whether they came for peace or justice. No one knew whether they followed the quiet farmer by choice or request. But one thing was certain. A man who had been humiliated was no longer alone. And the entire valley felt a new weight settle over their hearts. Like the night sky pressed down on every roof, that was the moment when people understood that mocking a man whose history they did not know might cost more than pride. And as the lights from the hills burned steady and silent, the valley held its breath. Waiting for the first move from a world they had forgotten to respect, many families hardly slept that night. Though no sound reached them from the hills. It was not noise that kept eyes open, but the quiet weight of something coming closer, something unseen but strongly felt. Mothers checked windows more than once, fathers stood near doors with lamps lowered, children whispered questions that no grown voice could answer. The entire valley had lived comfortably believing that silence meant safety. But now silence felt like a warning delivered without words. No one dared speak of who might have called the scouts or what they planned to do. The quiet farmer was nowhere to be seen, that unsettled folks more than the watchers in the dark. The next morning, the valley woke to pale light and uneasy hearts. Some hoped everything seen the night before was only imagination guided by fear. Others wanted to ride up and see for themselves, but no one wished to be the first. The young men who mocked the farmer kept their mouths shut for once. Their faces that once shined with laughter now looked like dry clay. Still, pride kept them from admitting they were scared. They gathered near the saloon, talking in low voices while pretending there was nothing strange about the night. One of them even tried to joke again. But the sound of his laughter fell flat, and no one followed. The elders, however, understood that scouts from the hills would not light watch fires unless they had reason. They remembered stories from years past when peace between settlers and Apache families was not yet clear, and trust took time to grow. Some recalled seasons when hunters shared meat with tribal families and learned how to respect the land. They also remembered that Apache scouts did not waste energy or time. If they were watching, they were studying, measuring, judging, or waiting for a sign. No one knew if they watched as protectors or decision-makers, but the thought that they stood somewhere unseen made every step feel heavier. By midday, the town finally noticed something else. The quiet farmer's mule was missing from its usual post near his fence. His door looked shut, and no tools lay outside. Someone said he was seen heading toward the hills 2 days earlier with smoked meat, corn, and a folded blanket. Another person claimed he had been speaking softly toward the trees, as if answering voices only he heard. The sheriff tried to act calm, saying he would ride up there soon, but he delayed when no deputy wished to go with him. While days passed, the tension grew like a storm cloud that refused to release rain. Daily life continued, but everyone acted differently. Folks traveled in pairs, not alone. Children were told to stay close to home instead of roaming the fields. Farmers checked their fences twice before nightfall. Traders who rode near the tree line swore they saw figures kneeling beside tall bushes, watching, waiting, yet never stepping forward. No threat was made, no weapon raised, but the presence of the scouts felt like a silent trial taking place, where no judge could be seen. The background of the quiet farmer became the center of every whisper. A few older women remembered seeing him long ago when he arrived, thin and tired. Carrying only a handmade blanket and a small pouch, he never told where he came from or who his family was. Someone said he once used an Apache word for thanks when handed warm biscuits. Another remembered how he carved patterns into wood that looked like symbols used by mountain people. Nothing about him seemed threatening, but everything about him felt rooted in something deeper than simple farm life. Some wondered if he had once been taken in by an Apache family during hardship, or if he had been taught their values after losing his own. It was clear he respected the land, like someone who believed every tree, rock, and wind gust carried memory. When rain failed, he did not curse the sky. He gathered rain pots and saved water. When his crops struggled, he whispered to them as if they understood patience. Those who insulted him did not understand that quiet strength came from survival, not pride. As talk spread, guilt began to settle inside the hearts of a few townsfolk. They questioned why they allowed humiliation to happen when no law or belief permitted it. Some wished they had stopped the young men that day at the fair. Others wondered if they too shared blame for laughing or remaining quiet. None knew what the scouts planned, but no one could shake the feeling that the valley itself was being weighed. Each evening, the watchfires appeared again in the hills. No two were ever placed in the exact same location, proving that the scouts were not wandering. They were planning, observing, studying. Even the livestock grew restless each time the flames appeared. Horses paced, dogs whined, and even the cattle behaved strangely. Nature understood what people tried to ignore. Meanwhile, somewhere near those hills, the quiet farmer moved like someone returning to a part of his life he once left behind. He walked paths familiar to his feet yet unseen by most. He carried a small pack and moved with steady steps, as if following a trail drawn in his mind. He reached a hidden ridge where a group of scouts stood waiting. They did not greet him loudly or speak with dramatic gestures. Instead, they nodded, acknowledging his arrival as something expected. He placed his pack down and sat near them, not as a stranger, but as one of their own. Back in town, a few brave souls decided to seek answers in a respectful way. An older woman placed fresh bread outside her porch as a peaceful sign. A blacksmith left clean water near the path leading up the ridge. A small boy placed berries on a rock, believing kindness had value. None of those offerings were touched right away, but the townsfolk noticed they disappeared overnight. That alone gave a sliver of calm to their hearts, though no explanation followed. Stories about honor, land, and respect from old generations returned to discussions. Some remembered that people once lived in harmony by sharing knowledge rather than proving power. They also recalled how those who walked softly often carried wisdom that loud voices could never match. Slowly, a few began to understand that humiliation, even without violence, can cut deeper than any weapon. Still, the fear did not fade. Not knowing the farmer's role in the scouts' presence became its own mystery. Was he seeking justice, protection, or something else altogether? Did he want the town to understand their mistake, or feel what he had been forced to feel? No one could guess the depth of his silence anymore. One evening, the young men who started the incident decided they must prove strength once again, believing reputation mattered more than reason. They spoke among themselves, saying that no group hiding in the hills would intimidate them. But even as they spoke, their voices shook. They agreed to ride toward the farmer's cabin to show no fear, even though none of them wished to lead. At dusk, they finally saddled their horses, hearts beating faster than hooves on dry soil. The rest of the town watched from a distance, whispering prayers that nothing foolish would be done. The older folks warned them to think twice, but pride pulled them forward. As they rode nearer to the cabin, no fire burned inside and no voice answered when they shouted. But as they approached the tree line, a soft sound emerged, not threatening but controlled, like someone stepping on twigs with intent. The horses stopped on their own, as if sensing something humans refused to see. The riders froze, still gripping reins, but unsure whether to go forward or turn back. In the quiet that followed, a single hawk cried overhead, circling the ridge like a messenger passing between two worlds. And in that moment, they realized their next choice would decide far more than their own pride. The riders sat on their horses, breathing hard though they had barely moved. It was not the distance that tired them, but the weight of eyes they could not see. One of them shifted in the saddle and called out the farmer's name as if that would make everything normal again. Only the trees answered, branches rubbing softly together. Their horses twitched their ears, noses flaring, catching a scent that carried from the ridge. Smoke, leather, pine, and something older. A presence that did not belong to town life, but to hills and rivers. From behind a clump of scrub oak, a figure stepped out with slow, measured steps. It was the quiet farmer. His hat was pulled low, and his coat looked different, decorated with careful stitching and beadwork along the edges. It was a style some had only seen from a distance when Apache riders passed by years ago. He did not raise a rifle, did not shout, did not run. He only stood there and studied the young men, his eyes calm yet unreadable. For the first time they understood they were the ones being judged. "You should go home," he said, voice steady. "This is not your place today." The boldest of the riders forced a nervous smile. He tried to speak the way he always had in front of others, loud and full of himself. "We came to ask why those watchfires are burning up there. Folks are worried. I thought maybe you could call your friends off. Let everyone see they mean no harm." The farmer's gaze did not soften. "You did not ride here for the town," he replied. "You rode because you are afraid of what you started." Fear is loud inside a man who knows he did wrong. The words cut deeper than any insult because they rang true. The rider's hand tightened on the reins. Another young man, who had kicked the farmer's basket at the fair, could not bear the silence. "We were only fooling," he muttered. "No real harm done? People joke all the time." The farmer took a slow breath. Behind him, farther up the slope, a few faint shapes shifted among the rocks. Apache scouts watching silently, bows unstrung but close, horses tied in the shadows. They did not move closer, yet their presence pressed like a hand on the back of every rider's neck. You mocked a man who did nothing to you and believed it was small. But men who live with the land know there are no small things. Every word, every act leaves a mark. You left yours in front of your children, your women, your elders. Now they carry that shame with you. The riders exchanged uneasy glances. None of them wanted to admit that the memory of their own laughter now made their stomachs turn. Pride fought against regret, twisting their faces into nervous frowns. The main conflict stretched between them and the farmer like a rope ready to snap, pulling on both sides. Back in town, other stories were unfolding. A young mother named Ruth kept her 2 children inside, kneading bread with tense arms while stealing looks through the window. Her husband had not joined the ride. He believed in keeping peace, but he also feared being seen as weak. Ruth remembered the day at the fair clearly. She had watched the farmer pick up his scattered beans with shaking hands and had said nothing. Now her guilt felt like a stone in her chest. Her oldest boy, Thomas, stared at the hills every chance he got. He had once seen the farmer hand his little sister a carved wooden bird near the well, just because she had dropped her toy. That memory did not match what the young men said about him. In Thomas's mind, the farmer was not someone to laugh at, but someone worth listening to. When his mother turned away, Thomas tied a small white cloth to a stick and placed it outside their door. A quiet sign of peace his childish heart hoped someone might see at the same time. The sheriff sat at his desk, turning his worn badge in his fingers. He was a man who believed in law, but he knew the law in that valley was thin and easily broken by fear. He had seen trouble between settlers and Apache families in other towns, trouble that started with a joke and ended with burned fields. He did not want that here. Yet he also knew some men would rather cling to pride than admit fault. The presence of Apache scouts on the ridges meant the balance of power had shifted. The valley was not only under town rules anymore. It was under the eyes of people who had lived there long before. An elder named Owen made his way to the sheriff's office that afternoon, leaning on a stick. He had lived in the valley before the saloon was built, before the road was cut straight through the land. Years ago, he had traded with Apache hunters, sharing tobacco and stories by the river. He told the sheriff, "You cannot treat this like a simple dispute. A man tied to the hills was insulted in front of his people. Those scouts are not here to raid. They are here to see if we understand what we did." "So what do we do?" the sheriff asked. "First, you stop those boys from making things worse," Owen replied. "Then you show respect, not with empty words, but with deeds that cost something. Honor is not cheap." Back at the tree line, the standoff between the riders and the farmer stretched on. The horses shifted again, impatient with the strange quiet. One of the younger riders finally broke. His voice shook as he spoke. "If they plan to attack the town, we have a right to know. People are scared. Children are scared. You used to live among us. Do you stand with them now, or with us?" The farmer looked at him with tired eyes. "I stand with what is right. The scouts came because I told them how you laughed while I knelt in the dirt. I wanted them to see the kind of men you are. Not so they would hurt you, but so they would understand why this valley's heart feels sick." The riders did not know what to say. None of them had expected him to admit speaking to the scouts. The idea that he could call them down from the hills like kin was something they were not ready to accept. It meant they had humiliated a man who was not alone, a man with ties they did not see. Then tell them to leave. The boldest rider snapped, his voice more shaky anger than true courage. "We cannot sleep with those fires up there. People think a raid is coming. The cattle buyers are talking about turning back. This could ruin the town."
Ow.
The farmer tilted his head slightly. "Why should they leave? You never told them to come?" "Did. They watch to see if you are worth trusting or fearing. If you want them gone, show them who you are. Show them you understand what you did to a man who did you no harm." The conflict deepened. It no longer rested only on the farmer's hurt feelings or the young men's pride. It stretched through the town's future, trade with buyers, safety for families, and the fragile path between two worlds, the settled valley and the old Apache land. Every choice, every word, could pull those worlds closer or tear them apart. Farther up the ridge, among the scouts, another angle unfolded. One of the Apache men, older than the rest, watched the town through calm eyes. He had known the quiet farmer as a younger man. Years ago, the farmer had wandered half-starved into their camp during a harsh winter, and they had shared food with him. He had worked beside them, learned to listen to the land, and left later with their blessing when he said he wished to try building a life among the settlers. Now the elder scout wondered whether that trust had been misplaced. He nodded to a younger scout beside him. "Do you see how their lights burn late at night?" he said in his own tongue. "Fear makes men lose sleep, but fear can also teach. We do not rush, we wait. We see whether their hearts can bend like the branches after a storm or break like dry sticks." The younger scout, quick and sharp-eyed, watched the riders near the cabin. If they had struck him that day, not only mocked him, they would already be paying with more than fear, he said. "He asks us to watch, not to strike. That is his choice. He still hopes for something from them." The elder's gaze drifted to the small white cloth near one of the cabins in the valley. He had sharp sight and saw what Thomas had placed there. "There are children who know more than their fathers," he murmured. "We wait." The subplots nodded together quietly. Ruth's worry, Thomas's small sign of peace. The sheriff's struggle between law and wisdom. Owen's old memories, the scout's own questions about trust. All folded into the main conflict like streams feeding a river. The tension did not break. It grew wider and deeper. As the sun dropped toward evening, the riders finally turned their horses. They did not charge or spit curses. They retreated in slow, uncertain silence. The quiet farmer watched them go, then stepped back toward the trees. Vanishing once more into the line where valley and hills met, the scouts returned to their careful positions among the rocks, unseen but present. When the riders reached town, folks rushed to meet them. "What did he say?" someone called. "Will the scouts leave? Are we safe?" The boldest rider opened his mouth, shut it again, and looked away. Pride and shame wrestled in his throat. Another rider, the one whose voice had shaken the most, finally answered, "He said they are watching us, not to attack, but to see if we are the kind of people who fix what we break." The words rolled through the gathered crowd, stirring fear and something else that felt like the beginning of understanding. Business owners worried about money. Parents worried about their children. Some argued that they should arm up, stand strong, show they would not be pushed around. Others argued that they should speak to the farmer, offer apology, and show respect before things turned worse. As voices rose in the dusty street, the sheriff stepped forward, his badge catching a sliver of fading light. He knew any choice he made could either ease the tension or snap it in two. He looked at the ridge where new watchfires were being lit, one after another. Faint orange points flared to life, forming that quiet circle once again around the valley. Night would soon cover the land. The scouts would keep their silent guard. The town would face itself in the mirror of its own actions. And somewhere between them, in the space where old land and new lives met, the quiet farmer waited for a sign that people who broke a man's dignity could learn how to mend it, or whether they would choose a path from which there was no return. The valley carried a strange quiet for days, a quiet that sat heavy on everyone's chest. The watchfires on the hills never failed to glow as soon as the sky turned orange, and every night they seemed a little brighter, a little closer, like a slow breath that refused to fade. The people did their chores with shaking hands, speaking only when needed, and looking often toward the ridges where silent riders watched the land as if guarding something sacred. The young men who had started the trouble avoided crowds and kept their hats low, not knowing if they should expect judgment or forgiveness. Every sunrise felt like a question with no answer. The sheriff knew something had to be done before fear pushed someone into foolish action. He decided to gather the town for a meeting at the old barn, a place where important matters had been settled in years past. Lanterns were hung along the walls, casting warm light over wooden beams. Families arrived slowly, some on foot, some by wagon, others riding and tying their horses far from the door. Like they sensed the barn might hold decisions that could shape their future. The young men stood together near the back, silent and stiff. When the sheriff stepped forward, the crowd hushed. His voice was calm, but weighed down with responsibility. He told them that survival in a land like theirs was not decided by loud talk, but by respect and choices that held long-term meaning. He explained that the quiet farmer was not just a lonely man with small crops, but someone who carried knowledge, roots, and friendships beyond their houses and beyond their understanding. "We have forgotten that this valley was not empty before we arrived," he said. "Now someone is reminding us." A few whispered that the scouts should leave and let the town be. But Owen, the elder, spoke next and reminded them that no land truly belonged to anyone who disrespected it or mocked someone who lived with honor. His voice shook, but his words rang clear. "What we fear is not their strength," he said. "What we fear is that we have lost ours." From there, different voices rose with different feelings. One shopkeeper admitted she felt guilty for not speaking up at the fair. A cattle dealer feared the presence of the scouts might ruin business. A school teacher spoke about wanting the children to grow up around peace rather than bitterness. Some believed an apology would fix everything quickly, as if words alone could mend what pride had broken, while others wondered if something more meaningful was needed to prove they understood. The sheriff decided they must send someone to speak with the quiet farmer in a respectful way, not with demands, but with humility. Yet no one immediately stepped forward. Everyone understood that whoever went might carry the entire weight of the valley on their shoulders. At last Owen raised his hand, shaky but brave, and offered to go. Another voice followed, then another. Soon 3 townsfolk, including a woman, stood ready to ride at dawn to meet the farmer near the place where the woods touched open land. Meanwhile, unseen by town eyes, up in the hills the quiet farmer sat near a small fire with the elder Apache scout. They spoke softly, their words carried by wind but not stolen. The farmer admitted he did not want bloodshed, fear, or loss. He wanted understanding, something deeper than a shouted apology. He wanted the valley to remember that humans were shaped by their actions, not by what they owned. And that peace was not made by silence, but by honesty. The elder scout reminded him that not all people were cruel, only some, and that others might learn if given a chance. But he also warned that if the land spirit was wounded too many times, it would turn cold to everyone, no matter who they were. The farmer nodded, feeling the weight of a bridge stretching between 2 worlds. With him standing at the very center, morning arrived with soft pink clouds and a cold wind. The 3 chosen townsfolk saddled their horses and rode slowly toward the tree line. They carried no weapons, only small gifts, warm bread, water, and a hand-carved wood staff meant to symbolize peace. When they approached the woods, a scout stepped into view from behind a pine tree, his bow resting against his back, not drawn. He said nothing, but his eyes asked what they carried in their hearts. Owen stepped forward and said they wished to speak to the farmer and to show respect. The scout nodded once and disappeared, signaling silently to others. After several tense minutes, the quiet farmer approached, wearing the same stitched coat as before. The 3 stood before him, feeling the weight of every mistake the town had made. Owen bowed his head slightly and spoke. He explained that they saw the harm that had been done and the fear that grew out of it. He admitted the town forgot the roots of the land and said they wanted to learn, not pretend. The woman who came with him offered the bread with trembling hands. She said she wished she had spoken at the fair, and that silence sometimes harms as much as cruelty. The 3rd man held out the carved staff and said it was not a gift meant to buy forgiveness, but a sign that they wished to walk a new path if they were allowed. The farmer listened without interrupting. When they finished, he did not smile nor frown. Instead, he said, "Words are seeds. They mean nothing unless tended." Owen answered gently that they did not come to finish anything in one morning, but to start something that could grow. The farmer looked at their faces, seeking truth rather than performance. Then he said he would return with them at sunset to speak to the whole town. But the scouts would continue watching until trust was earned. When news spread that the farmer would return, the town filled with mixed feelings. Some felt relief, others worry, and a few still clung to pride like a rusted shield. The children asked if everything would be fine now. An adult struggled to answer because truth had not yet finished its work. The young men who mocked the farmer felt their hearts pounding stronger than anyone else. They realized there was no way to escape facing what they had done. 2 of them tried to practice what they would say, stumbling over half-formed words that tasted awkward in their mouths. Another sat alone near the creek, throwing pebbles into the water, wondering how everything had spiraled into something far bigger than a foolish moment of laughter, as the sun slowly sank behind the hills, painting the sky with gold and purple. The valley gathered again near the heart of town, waiting. Horses snorted, lanterns flickered, and a hush fell as figures appeared at the edge of the road. First came the quiet farmer. Behind him, in the distance but still visible, silhouettes of Apache scouts waited near the ridge, watching with steady patience. They did not approach, but their presence reminded everyone that honesty could not be faked. The farmer stopped at the center of the gathering. His eyes swept across the familiar faces, and something changed in the air. Like the land itself leaned in to hear what would come next. The sheriff stepped forward and said he welcomed the farmer, and that tonight was not for anger or blame, but for truth. The young men were called to stand in front, and they did, pale and tense. Knowing their voices could not hide behind others anymore, the farmer waited, letting the silence settle like dust before rain. The moment stretched, suspense curling through every soul. The flickering lights from the ridge seemed to pulse like beating hearts. Everyone could feel that what happened in the next few breaths would decide whether the valley healed or cracked forever. The quiet farmer stood still in the fading light, giving the young men space to speak before he said anything himself. The crowd barely breathed, and even the horses seemed to sense that finally, truth stood close enough to touch. The first young man stepped forward, the same one who had kicked the farmer's basket at the fair. His voice cracked as he spoke, not because of fear of punishment, but because shame had finally reached his heart. He admitted he had acted out of pride and ignorance, thinking laughter and loud words made him stronger. He confessed that seeing the watchfires every night made him face the truth that real strength had nothing to do with mocking someone quiet and gentle. He said he was sorry, not because he feared the scouts, but because he now understood the pain he caused. The second boy followed, saying he remembered how the farmer always worked alone and never asked for help, and that instead of respecting that, they turned it into a joke. He told everyone that he could never forget the look in the farmer's eyes when he knelt to pick up the spilled beans. It haunted him, and he knew that look had said more than any words could. The third finally spoke too, his face wet with tears he tried to hide. He said he did not know how to make things right, but he wanted to learn if he was given a chance. No one clapped, no one cheered, but something eased in the air. Like a locked door had finally opened. The farmer nodded slowly, taking in each word. Then he spoke, his voice steady and without anger. He said that apologies built from fear fell apart like dust, but apologies built from understanding could take root like seeds. He said he did not want the town to fear the hills or the scouts, but to remember what happens when a community forgets that respect is the strongest fence anyone can build. He paused, then added, "You did not know who watched you that day, but now you do. A man should live in a way that if someone sees him from far away, they see a heart, not a shadow." The sheriff, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. He asked the farmer what he wished the town to do, not as a demand, but as an invitation to help shape a better path. The farmer looked around at every face and then turned his gaze toward the hills. A soft breeze moved through the valley, and the watchfires flickered as if listening. He said he wanted something lasting, not a single gesture or a short memory. He asked that every year on the same day of the fair, the town hold a gathering called the Gathering of Respect, where people from town and hills could come, share food, crafts, stories, and music, to remind themselves that no land belonged to only one story. He also asked that anyone who wished to learn more about the land, the plants, and the ways of survival could visit him or the scouts if invited, so that understanding could replace fear. The town listened closely. Many nodded. Some cried quietly. Even those who once feared change now sensed that this was the only path that felt truly safe and honorable. The sheriff agreed, and so did Owen, who promised to help organize the first event. Ruth lifted her hand and said she would bake enough bread for everyone who attended, even if she had to wake before sunrise. The schoolteachers said she would tell the children stories of respect and unity so they would grow up knowing kindness as strength. Others offered cattle meat, woodwork, music, blankets, and supplies. The quiet farmer accepted their promises, but before anything could truly be settled, he had one more request. He asked the scouts to step forward, not as warriors or watchers, but as guests. For a moment no one moved, and then, slowly, 3 Apache scouts rode down from the ridge on calm horses. They stopped at the edge of the gathering, and the crowd parted with quiet respect. The farmer spoke to them in their language, sharing what had happened. The elder scout nodded and looked out at the town. Seeing not fear but sincerity forming like morning light, the elder scout then spoke gently to the crowd, explaining that their presence was never meant to strike fear, but to show the valley that every person, no matter how quiet, carried dignity. He said that if a community forgot that, it risked losing something more precious than crops or cattle. He accepted the town's promise and said they would watch not as guards now, but as neighbors who shared the same wind, rain, and sky. With that, the fires on the ridge began to die down one by one, not from fear, but from peace. The scouts turned their horses and rode back to their camp, not disappearing forever, but returning to a distance where respect could breathe freely. The people stood in quiet amazement as the last light faded and only stars remained above. Like a new promise written across the sky, the gathering ended with a calm that had not existed in the valley for many seasons. The young men approached the farmer privately and asked if they could help rebuild his small garden, repair his fence, or work alongside him so they could learn from the land instead of mocking it. The farmer agreed, not because he wanted servants, but because shared work built stronger bonds than empty words. In the following days, the valley changed in small but powerful ways. Children ran more freely, unafraid of shadows on the hills. Families left small gifts of thanks near the tree line, not as repayment, but as acknowledgement. The sheriff visited the farmer often, learning how to read tracks, how to understand weather by listening to the wind, and how to tell stories that meant more than simple entertainment. Thomas, the little boy who placed the white cloth apiece, visited the farmer often with questions about birds, soil, and carved wooden animals. The farmer taught him with patience, saying that a child's curiosity could heal more land than any wall or fence. Ruth brought bread every once in a while, sometimes staying to talk about life and how kindness could spread quietly like seeds. When the next fair day arrived, the town prepared not with prideful contests, but with unity and celebration. The scouts were invited, and some came, bringing handmade items, music, and stories from the mountains. The young men, once full of empty pride, now stood as respectful hosts, greeting guests, helping children, and working without seeking praise. The farmer walked among them, quiet as always, but this time he did not walk alone. People greeted him with warm smiles, and he returned gentle nods that carried more meaning than any long speech. That evening, when lanterns glowed under trees and laughter mixed with flute music, the valley felt whole. A sense of peace settled deep, like good soil ready for new seasons. The farmer looked at the ridges, where no watchfires burned anymore, and he felt grateful that understanding had grown where anger once sat. The elders spoke about how respect, peace, and honesty became the strongest tools for survival in the old American lands. They said that the valley would be remembered not for its conflict, but for how it learned to heal. The younger ones listened carefully, knowing that they would one day carry those words forward, and so the valley lived on without fear, building new traditions, stronger friendships, and deeper wisdom. The quiet farmer remained who he always was, steady, humble, hard-working, but now he was seen, not as a strange outsider, but as a bridge between hearts, cultures, and land. The scouts continued visiting from time to time, never as watchers again, but as part of a bond no one wished to break. In the end, the valley learned the greatest lesson it ever could. A strong community was not built by loud voices or big possessions, but by respect, empathy, and understanding of the land and each other. The people who once laughed at the quiet farmer now learned from him, and the boy who once feared shadows grew up believing that peace could be protected by kindness as much as courage. And from that season onward, the town, the quiet farmer, and the hills shared not just space, but trust, a trust strong enough to last through changing winds, falling leaves, and all the new stories that would one day rise from that same valley soil under the same watching sky.